Welcome once again to SiteGrinder, a hint at a time, and today we're going to learn about pages. There are two different primary methods for making pages in SiteGrinder. There's a couple ancillary page-like effects that we can also use, and we'll talk about them at other times, but two primary methods for creating pages. Let's look at this Photoshop document first. This Photoshop document is right now got a few layers here set up to describe a page about beans. So we've got some text about beans, some more text about beans, and a nice picture about beans. That's quite wonderful. We also have a little title about rice, some description about rice, and a lovely picture that has rice on it as well. And there's a navigation menu that allows us to navigate. Ultimately, it has a beans and a rice menu item in it so that we can navigate between the beans and the rice pages. So we're doing pretty well here. So when we have this sort of thing, where we've got some layers we want on multiple pages and some layers we want on individual pages, this is a good time for us to be using layer comps for these sorts of things. Layer comps have their own palette in Photoshop. And what layer comps are, it's Photoshop's ability to remember the state of the layers palette, the visibility, that sort of thing, such that it can be restored at any time. So making the page look the way I want it to look right now, I've got the rice page stuff all set up. I'm going to make a new layer comp, and I'm going to call it rice-page. Now -page is a SiteGrinder hint, and it is a type of hint that's used only on layer comps, never on layers, and it just tells SiteGrinder that this layer comp we want to be a web page. It's not just a working layer comp or a layer comp we would have for some other reason in our Photoshop file. Also notice in the layer comps palette, when creating these layer comps, we have the visibility, position, and appearance checkboxes. You generally, and pretty much nearly absolutely always, want to track visibility only and not track position or appearance. If you track position or appearance, you seriously increase the amount of bookkeeping you have to do to keep your pages up to date if you want to move layers or change their layer styles later and that sort of thing. So it's just a big headache and a cause for a lot of user error. So I strongly recommend using visibility only and not tracking position or appearance. Alright, well there's my rice page, so it's all set up. That's very great. So I'm just going to turn these layers off now, and then I'm going to set up the layers, the palette, the way I want the beans to be. And so then I'll make another layer comp, and I'll have the beans -page. So now we have in Photoshop the rice page and the beans page, and I can toggle between them back and forth whenever I want to. That's very, very powerful. Now there's another way of making pages with SiteGrinder, and that other way is done in the Content Manager, which we'll be seeing shortly. And that other way requires having a template page that we can use as sort of a master page. Now I could use either the beans or the rice page as a template page, but in this particular case I've got one that I'm going to explicitly set up as a template page. So I'm just going to turn these things off, and in their place I've got an image, content, and title. So the content text is some lorem ipsum, the title is just generically named title, or maybe I should just call this top text, might be more accurate. And the image has the content hint on it. The content hint is a very specific hint, and what it means is that the images that normally appear in your Photoshop file are not changeable. They're considered to be design elements, and they can't be changed later in the Content Manager by you or the client. But an image that has the content hint on it can be changed later in the Content Manager by you or your client who's going to be editing the site with the Content Manager. So if you have particular images that you want to change out, that you have an intention to change out, or for your client to be able to change them, then you put the content hint on them, and then they'll be changeable later. Alright, so that's all set up. So I'm going to make one more layer comp, and I'm just going to call this master template -page. So now we have rice page, beans page, and master template page. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's build this site out. So I'm going to open up SiteGrinder 3 again. It's going to scan this, let us know if there's any trouble in this file. I don't expect any errors. And then lastly, we're going to build these pages. So let's just go ahead and build these pages. And now in the background, Photoshop is going to town. Photoshop is outputting all the graphics and doing the compositing and any slicing and that sort of stuff that it has to do. And SiteGrinder, meanwhile, is outputting the HTML and the CSS and the JavaScript that it takes to make these pages. Now the Rice page is finished building, as has the Beans page. So now we have the Rice page and the Beans page and the master template page all output. And notice also that the Beans and the Rice the menu items are also working. So I can go click this menu and then now navigate. Now that's an interesting point. There's been a little bit of fast stuff going on here. This menu is now working even though we didn't make any explicit effort to set any hyperlinks or anything like that. Whenever SiteGrinder sees a page with a certain name, such as Beans page, and it sees that there's a menu item with the same name, such as Beans, or a button with the same name, such as Beans button, then SiteGrinder says, well, obviously the user intended for these to be linked together, and so it links them together for us. And so SiteGrinder is very smart about linking things together. So if you just simply need to link your buttons and your menu items to the pages that you are creating, you don't have to do anything more than simply name them the same. All right. Well, I could set some more settings here in the Design Manager, but I don't really have anything else I need to set right now. I'm pretty happy with these pages, and I think that for this work for our client that we're pretty much done. And so I'm going to get these over to the client site and move past Photoshop and get these in the hands of our client. And that's where deployment comes into. So I'm now going to, back in the SiteGrinder user interface in the Photoshop UI, I'm going to choose these same 3 pages and I'm going to click them for deployment, and I'm going to deploy them to a certain site. Now I've already set up a site for them because that's not what this lesson is about, and so I'm just going to go ahead and deploy them. So just a little bit about deployment, just real quick. The basic workflow while you're working on a site is that you work on it in Photoshop and the Design Manager and Photoshop and the Design Manager until the page is pretty much completely done, so that there's no more work that needs to be done on it. And then you deploy it to the site. And then now that deployment is really the first act of handing the site over to your client. There may be some more content that's set and some more things that's done, but it's really this sort of the beginning of turning it over to the client. It's also the end of using Photoshop on this particular design. You really need to think about it that way. With SiteGrinder 3, you don't want to use Photoshop as your website maintenance tool. We do the maintenance for the website with the SiteGrinder Content Manager, which is what we're looking at now. So here's my pages as they're deployed. They're really pretty much the same as they were before. But now we'll start to do a few things. I'm going to make the Rice page into the home page by clicking this little checkbox there. And, oh, hold on a sec. Yeah. All right, well, that was the client. You just called me on the phone, and they need to add another page to the site. They want to add a page about hominy. Well, one way of adding a page to this site would be to return to Photoshop and make a new hominy page. But I'm sort of prepared for this. I've already got a master template page that I could use that has an image I can change on and stuff like that. So I'm just going to make a new page right here in the Content Manager. And I'm going to set it up. I'm going to name it hominy. And I'm going to choose it. It's going to be a copy of the master template page. And I'm going to have it append a link to this page onto the navigation menu right from the get-go, so that'll just save me a little bit of time there. And now I've got my hominy page, and notice my menu has got this menu item in it, and if I go to my Beans page, I'll see that it's there as well, and the Rice page. So all my pages have this new hominy menu item there. I've activated the hominy page, and now I'm just going to set it up. I'm going to say, well, here's the content text. I'm going to edit this text and change it from the lorem ipsum that I had in there before pretty much to everything that you would ever want to know about hominy. Alright, so that's great. And then the top text was set to title right now. I'm just going to change that to say hominy. And the actual page title, the thing that's shown on the title bar of the browser when viewing the page by itself, that's master template. I'm going to set that to hominy as well. Alright, so that's all set up, and the last thing to do is to change this image. So we've got this image content here, and I'm just going to change this image to a new image. So I'll just go ahead and say upload here. I believe on my desktop, the client did send me a picture of hominy, and so it's all set up there. Set its alt tag to be hominy. I could add a link to it. I'm not going to, and there we go. And now I have a new page with a new picture that's set up about hominy. I can navigate to Rice, to Beans, to hominy, and if I have additional changes or additional pages, I can continue to do so. So in summary, we saw two different ways of making pages with SiteGrinder. First, we use layer comps in Photoshop to define individual pages or individual page designs. And the second way is using a page as a template, we can make new pages in the Content Manager. And so as you become more experienced in SiteGrinder, you're going to have to think smart about what should you do one way, what should you do another. Remember that all the stuff in Photoshop has a sort of build time and cost and that sort of stuff. So really, if you're looking at a 10 or 20 or 30 page site that needs to be created, very likely there's not actually 10 or 20 or 30 layer comps you need for that site. It's probably a few unique designs that need to be done as layer comps. Probably the home page is a unique design, maybe a contact page because of the form on it is unique design. Maybe you need a generic gallery template that you'll use, and maybe a generic content page, and maybe a generic video page or something like that. And then all of your other pages will be created by making copies of the gallery page, the generic gallery page, or the generic content page, or that sort of thing. So you really need to sort of start to learn to think smarter about how you want to do these things. And also remember, because I cannot reiterate this enough, that you want to deploy towards the end of the process. The deployment is the act of divorcing the site from Photoshop and beginning to hand it off to the client. And one of the reasons it's so important that this is understood is that earlier we've seen the Design Manager, where we can make changes in the browser in the Design Manager, and we go back to Photoshop, make changes there, and back and forth. And the reason that works so smoothly with the Photoshop and the Design Manager is Photoshop and the Design Manager are not actually editing the same thing at all. Photoshop has its things, and the Design Manager has its things, mostly things that Photoshop has no analog for, and so they work really well together. The Content Manager is making changes to the exact same sorts of things that Photoshop is changing. The Content Manager is changing the text of the page, something that you could in fact be setting in Photoshop. The Content Manager is changing the text of a menu, something you might be setting in Photoshop. And so if you're putting yourself in a place where you're deploying a page and then going back to Photoshop and redeploying the page and going back to Photoshop and redeploying a page, you are really setting yourself up for trouble because you're increasingly going to have these places where you're putting the site in conflict with Photoshop, and that eventually that's going to work out unhappy, where you're going to have some elements of the site that you want to preserve and some elements in Photoshop that you want to preserve, and no way of choosing which you're going to have the deploy overwrite or not overwrite and that sort of thing. So that's why it's just smart to put the deploy towards the end of the design cycle to finish the designs in Photoshop, and then deploy to the site, and then enter the maintenance and the other sort of creation, that you do in the Content Manager. And we'll be seeing a lot more about the Content Manager later. All right, well, thank you for listening, and have a pleasant day.